Deal with the point made about slavery reparations.
Well, yeah, absolutely. Africa were wrongly. What happened should never ever happen again.
But should it be paid for? I mean, it costs a lot of money.
Yes, I think Africans, provided you can prove it, that you do have a line that you were directly affected, naturally you should be given some money for it. As to whether it will be compensation enough for the African continent to disregard aid altogether, which was the question that the gentleman asked, I disagree, because there's more to that, Andrew, because the essence of aid has got to be tackled in the context.
We're going to talk about that.
Absolutely.
I mean, the question of slavery, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but the descendants of most of the people who were enslaved are not in Africa. They were removed from Africa. They're in the Caribbean or America. Right?
That's completely false, because in fact that's why you've got Freetown, which is the capital of Sierra Leone, where the first freed slaves were sent back to, and large numbers of slaves who themselves wanted to go back to the motherland, had no country to go back to because they've been away for so long. And of course, Freetown was one of many capitals that were selected, and that's why it's called Freetown. First free slaves were sent back to. And when you do see and hear people who've got English surnames coming from Sierra Leone, it's an indication that their ancestors and their forefathers were enslaved.
Okay, David Lee, no real change in that speech. That's the accusation.
Well, funnily enough, I worked in Freetown once, and I have to say that the people in Freetown, just like in Liberia, that they're not exactly always the most popular politicians in Sierra Leone, so far as people up country is concerned. But that's a slightly different question.
Deal with the problem. Deal with the complaint that Obama's speech had no real substance.
Well, I don't think that he would have been accused of being patronised if he'd said, you need to do this to your judiciary, you need to do this to your auditing, and so on. Sorry?
It's pretty much what he did say.
Well, he can't have it both ways.
No, I mean, I'm talking about American policy. Was there any sign of a change in American policy?
Yes, I pick up the point from the High Commissioner about a partnership. By the way, we have in Europe, and I was instrumental in getting House of Lords Committee to do a report on EU-AU, and I think that it's going to be much easier for the African Union, picking up the remark made earlier, if it is going to be able to strengthen its own role in Africa, just like the European Union. There'll be less of this whole business about we are victims, less of this whole business about European being the exploiter. And I think America, too, is a bit nervous about talking frankly. I mean, take the question of population growth. I mean, we're on the horns of a dilemma. I mean, this African population growth is far too much to be compatible. Look at the growth of the slums in Lagos and Kinshasa and so on. So there's a huge range of things where Obama is trying to touch on delicately things which have to be said.
Yeah, actually, you know, the population growth is going to keep growing. We're not disappearing. We're here to stay. Let me just say that on population growth.
But that's a consequence of poverty, right? Because in poor countries, a family is the welfare state.
Well, actually, the problem...
The more kids you have, the more likely you are to have someone to take care of you when you're old.
If Africans were able to benefit from our own resources, as opposed to Europeans, whether they're in America, Australia, New Zealand, or wherever, you know, benefiting from our resources, we wouldn't be talking about population. And, you know, given that some of us survived, despite the fact that there were attempts to eradicate us, we're still here, and we are going to continue to grow. This is the African century, and I think people better get used to it. Now, coming back to the question of reparations and linking it now to foreign policy, part of reparations is about putting a full stop to the continuing harm. When we're talking about slavery, we're not talking about something in the past. The impact of transatlantic enslavement, colonization is still very much a reality for Africans today. From Somalia to Suriname, from Guinea to Guyana. So we're talking about a contemporary reality.
How does it impact? What's the impact?
It's impacting in terms of our economic systems. It's impacting in terms of our self-concepts of who we are, so that we're not identifying that we actually have a common struggle. It's impacting in terms of the whole borders that we still have in Africa today, which were not designed by us, and which, if we're talking about the word tribalism, which we shouldn't really use, we don't really have tribes in Africa. if we're talking about what's called tribalism or negative ethnicity, let's really look at how some of these modern day borders are actually fomenting that. So actually Africa is still in the march of re-establishing itself. And colonization, we talk a lot about slavery, but we need to focus a lot also in an African continental context on colonization. Let's look at our education systems. Why is it many African professionals are having to come to Europe, Canada, North America? Why is it our own education systems are not considered good enough? Why is it that you're still controlling the knowledge systems, that we're still having to say, well, we need to come and get trained by Europeans? There's something fundamentally wrong.
Okay.
And the only thing I'd probably agree with in terms of what President Obama said was that as Africans we have to take responsibility, but what that means is that we have to take responsibility for first and foremost being who we are and being human beings as opposed to being considered subhuman.
High Commissioner, some of that criticism may have been directed at African governments as much as the West. What's your response to that?
With reference to reparations?
With reference to the way that Africa is divided on arbitrary lines set down by colonial rulers, that's a lot of it's caused by...
That's a great source of conflict in Africa. Those boundaries pass through even houses in Africa. And people want to have the feeling of communality, you know, like being together.
Is your country, are the boundaries of your country arbitrary, do you think?
Yes, they are. Like any other boundaries in Africa. I mean,
would you want to change them? Would you want to unite? You know, do you want to
definitely? That's why
boundaries based on tribes?
Our aim is to remove those boundaries and unite the whole continent as one.
Come in, Oluseyi Johnson.
I think when we look at this issue of tribes, it's so important that we get the right messages and right connotations ready. It's rightfully stated what the ambassador just stated, that the whole objective was for us to work as a team, work as a group, but we're not seeing that. When we have elections in many African countries, everyone votes purely on tribal lines. So that means that you would not necessarily get the best president to represent that country, because if you belong to a smaller ethnic group, you've got no chance. And of course, until we can actually appreciate the fact that even when we do have a chance to put things right, we clearly don't do so.
Do you see any evidence that African countries are rising above tribal politics?
No. It's something. I mean, tribalism is part and parcel of society. People try to fight against it, but people don't change.
Okay.
For you to change that, you need a whole mind, cultural, and being.
Let's take some questions from the audience. There's a woman there who's been waiting a long time. Yes, please.
Yeah. What I want to say, basically being in the UK and reading all the Western media, they've tried to show like as if in Africa, since Obama is in power, is that we are expecting something. We have been through a lot since the 50 years. And then coming from the Democratic Republic of the Congo, I know that my president, for example, by all the experience we had with the Western countries, we are not expecting that much. And then I don't think there is any country in Africa is waiting for Obama to come and make a kind of miracle.
Yeah.
So I think it would be better for the Western media to try, because we know how you always try to portray Africa.
Yeah.
I think at some point we really want just let Africa try to have a share of whatever is happening in the world, but not trying to always like waiting for Obama to come and do something.
And leave us alone. Yeah. All right. Another question from the audience there. Man in the stripy shirt. Yeah.
If you agree with me, the biggest problem Africans are facing is corruption. What is Obama doing to help Africa?
Let's do another question on this. This is from Kabira Namit. Kabira Namit, your question.
Do you believe that the African states are becoming stronger?
Are African states becoming stronger? And your original question was, are African rulers becoming more benevolent? What do you think, Lord Lee?
Well, unfortunately, it is a fact that out of 50 countries, about 25 are dictatorships, and that is a conservative estimate.
What do you mean by dictatorship?
Well, one-party states where they're... Well, we've just been congratulating Ghana on having an election, a closely fought election, a narrow majority, but the changeover of power was smooth. There may be one or two wobbles about... you know, the legal system under the new government, but the fact is that very few African countries have that arrangement.